So when our first hands-on, you are going to need to download a graphic into your Lesson 8 media folder. We are going to be using this. I always pick the wrong one. So navigating to media, and I'm going to save it right in there. And I'm not sure which will be easier for you. If you have a printer, I would probably display this and print it off. You will not be able to copy and paste because I put security on there, so you can't. I know I'm mean. This is an example of what it'll look like when you're done. And this is what you have to key in. So it starts, at the top with an internal style sheet. And then we get into all of the different form tags. And so what I'm going to do is pause this, get this all typed in, and then I'll come back and explain to you basically everything that you're working with here. So the first thing you're going to want to do is save into your Lesson 8 folder. And this should be an HTML file. And you want to call it Conference Registration Form. And again, make sure you get into your Lesson 8 folder. And then we'll just kind of go through here, and I'm going to explain what it is that you are looking at. So as far as the CSS goes, this should be fairly familiar to you. We've got a background color, we have a background image. We are positioning the image on the left, and we're not repeating. We've also specified, at least for the article element, and if you come down here, you'll notice that below body we have article, and the form is inside article. So for the article, we have a max and a minimum width. We turned on the overflow, and we've got a little bit of a left margin. For the form itself, we have display flex. That immediately should clue you in. This is a flex box. We've specified the direction for columns, and we want things centered as far as justified content goes. The field set elements are the items or the children of the Flexbox container or parent. Okay, so each of the field set groups is going to be a separate child or item. And those groups have a border. We have a box shadow specified, that is CSS3. And we have a minimum width, because remember with Flexbox, the widths are flexible. You can change the size of your browser window and it adjusts. And we don't want the width to be less than 350. For the legend, this is going to have the text that displays at the top of the group for the field set. So we have bold, font is going to be a little larger than normal, and we've got green for the color. For our labels and anything that has the H3 tag, we have this formatting specified. You'll notice that we did put a width on those labels. And that is really important if you want to get the labels to line up properly. So we have a width on them. The text is going to be aligned on the right-hand side. So we have a width of 100 pixels, And that's where the text is going to reside. And the text will be right aligned within that 100 pixel box, so to speak. We're going to make them bold so they stand out. And we've got the label specified as float left, which allows the entry area to go right next to the text. And then we have a little right margin specified to get a little space between the label and the entry area. I have an ID called gradient back. This is going to kind of go behind our field set. And we have a background image. So what we're doing is we're just putting a very light color that's a little bit see-through. We're putting that underneath the field set group, basically so you can see the form better, but it still allows you to see the portion of the graphic that it's covering. It allows you to see that underneath. And you'll see kind of how that works. Now this is a little bit new. You'll learn more about it next week. But you can specify gradients in CSS3. So this is kind of a little preview. So we are doing a circle gradient with white and light yellow. And you'll notice that I did include some code for Safari and mobile. That is the minus WebKit business. And I believe we talked about that last week. Some of the browsers don't recognize all of the newest HTML5 and CSS codes. So this is what you have to do to get them to recognize it. Moving on down, our input tag has specific CSS styling. We have a border, which basically just outlines it. And we have a little padding so the text isn't all smashed up against the edge. We put a little bit of a margin on the bottom to space things out because they're going to be displaying vertically. And float left just allows elements to come up alongside. For our text area and select, so this is a comment box and a drop-down list. Okay. For those two elements, we are also outlining those, and that's what border does. We've got some padding, and we also are specifying a little margin, so anything that comes below has a little bit of space. As far as styling our buttons go, this is how the buttons are going to look. We wanted a little space between the buttons and the form elements that are above them. So we specify margin top. 50 pixels puts a little space in there. We also have them in from the left side of the screen, 20%. We are going to center the text within the button. The buttons will have a background color of green and a font color of white. We are displaying the edges rounded. That's what border radius does. And we're putting a little shadow effect on the bottom of those buttons to help them stand out, makes them look a little bit more 3D. We've got some padding so that the text and the edge of the button are not smashed together. And the size increase is for the text in the button because we want the buttons to stand out. So we're going to make the text a little bit bigger than the default. And the center class is basically just used to center align basically any element or tag that we add it to. So this is our internal style sheet. And then we come down here. So you can see with the article tag, we did add the gradient back to that. We have our form. We've given it a name of confirm reg, and ID is also confirm reg. The action, you're going to send it to the processing script I mentioned in the lecture portion. All this script does is it reads everything from the form and it displays it back to you in the name value pairs. So you can kind of see what that looks like. we are using a get method. So when you submit the form, if you look on the address bar, you will see all of the data display. This is not a secure way to submit data, and you will see that when you submit the form. Then we get into our first group. Okay? And because we are doing the Flexbox, our first little group is also a Flexbox child. Okay, so here is the opening field set and the closing. So this is one group. We are giving the group a name of conference registration form. And so you can see we've got a label here for name, and that kind of matches what we have in the input tag. And then we've got the text name. Our input tag, this is a text input tag, and we've got ID and name set to name. Size is 30. Remember, this is the size of the box itself. Max length of 30, which means that their name cannot be longer than 30. And initially, the value is going to be blank. This is required, and this is where the focus should be when the form loads, because we want them to start entering data right at that point. And you'll see address is set up very similar to name. This is also text box. We have the size of the box, 50. The maximum length that they can key in is 50. And we've got a default value set at blanks. For city, very similar. The only difference is max length and size is 30. We get into state. Again, this is a text box. You will see that we did set a default value of Michigan, which means if they don't type anything in state, it will use Michigan as the value. For zip code, we have a size of 12, setting the initial value to blank. And then we have email. And I don't think there's really anything new here, except we are using placeholder. Okay, and placeholder is basically giving it a hint. It is not a default value. If they do not enter an email, actually email is required, so they're going to have to. But if it wasn't required, then it would not use this as a default value. Okay, it's just a hint showing them how to enter an email address. But we are requiring it, so they are going to have to type something in. Although we are being nice and we're allowing it to autocomplete. We've got the cell phone, which is what C-phone is. And so again, we have a placeholder giving them a hint. We're saying that this is also required. And then we've got their work phone number. And again, we are giving them a placeholder for the hint. Okay, so that is the first group. And I think I'm going to show you this, and then we'll go down and take a look at our second group. So let me go over. And I got to grab the right folder here. Too many folders. Okay. Let us pull this up. So the section that I just described is this top section here. Okay, and you can see that we have the placeholders displayed. And then we also have the state filled in. And let's go back over here. Okay, too many things open. So let's scroll down. So here's our next child. And this is the preference section. And remember, this is for a conference. So they have their food preference to select from, and then there's actually 3 different sessions they can attend. And so they need to pick what they want to see for each session. So we've got a label for food, and we're specifying alignment for the label should be at the top. And that is because we have that float left business going on. And so the select is going to come up next to the label, and we want the label at the top. So here we've got our select, and this is basically a drop-down list. So we've got the name and the ID specified as food, and we have a size specified. And then we're setting the width on this to auto and the height to 150. So it's going to figure out how wide to make this. And then we are kind of limiting how tall it is, and that's based on how much space we have in our form. So if we go out and take a look, this is what we're looking at. Okay, so we've got an open list box, and we said the height was 150. The width, we just kind of let it look at what it had and size it appropriately. And you will notice that very last option, surprised me, is what we have selected by default. Okay, that's what selected equals selected does if you put it into an option tag. So we have our select, our opening select, and we have our closing select. And then in between, we have all of the options that they can pick from. So we have a value that is sent to the script when it's submitted. We have the text that is shown to the user in the list. Okay, so the value is what gets sent to the script. The text is what the user sees. This last one is the one that is selected by default. So if they don't make a selection, they're going to get surprise me. Then we come down. The next 3 list boxes are data lists. And this is something that is new in HTML5. And so basically what you do with a data list is you take an input tag and you tell it the name of the list. Okay, and we're giving it a size. Okay, but we're basically giving it a name here. Whatever name you give it is the name that you have to use in the data list ID attribute. So we have our opening data list tag, we have the ID attribute, we're calling it session list 1. That has to match the list attribute in your input tag. They must match. Okay, so in the input tag, I've got the ID and the name. I do have a placeholder displaying some default or some, prompting text. The most important thing here is the list attribute, because if you omit this, you're not going to have a list. That name is what connects the data list to your input element. Okay, so it's super important. Then we have the data list tag, and then we have a closing tag, and in between we have all of the options. And again, whatever you have for value gets displayed, and it also gets sent to the script. And this is what makes it a little bit nicer than select. Okay, because with select, we had to do the value, and we also had to specify the text that's going to display. And with the data list, the value is the text that displays. It's the same thing, so you don't have to duplicate. Okay, you just do the value. That is what gets displayed. So there's a lot less duplication, and you can see for a long entry like this, that would be kind of a pain to duplicate that information. Okay, so that is why we chose data list for this particular element. You'll notice that we do a data list for the second and third session as well. And it's for the same reason, because the value is quite lengthy. We don't want to have to duplicate that between the opening and closing options. So if we use a data list, the value is automatically displayed. You will notice with our second data list, the list attribute has session list 2. That is the ID that we give it right in the data list opening tag. And for the third one, we have session list 3. And again, our ID in that opening tag is session list 3. So let's take a look at just that, because that is a lot. So we basically have 3 different lists. The first one is a select, and this is fine for a select because, you know, these food values are rather short. The next 3 are data lists, and as you can see with long entries, data list is a much better choice. So let's take a look here. So we have our selection, and then if we hover over please make a selection, you know, we can choose what it is that we would want to do. And that brings us to the bottom section, which is payment. I think we only have 2 children. I lied, we don't have 3. We only have 2 children with this Flexbox. So the bottom payment section. To get these to line correctly, I did add a div here to display inline block. And I put a div around the buttons to get them to display properly below the payment. So I wanted the payment to kind of line up like this. So I had to use the inline block for that. And then I wanted the buttons to be below, so they have their own little div. And then the rest is pretty self-explanatory. I did put a little margin left in the paragraph, and all of the payment information is all in the same paragraph. So here's where it opens and here's where it closes. And then we have all of the radio buttons in between. And you'll notice with the radio buttons, we have a label, you know, around the text that displays. And then in the input tag, we're just saying the type is radio, the name, and the name here is payment, but the ID is PayPal. Radio buttons are a little bit different. You want to have different IDs. Okay. And then you'll notice that the values kind of match what we had for the IDs. And then we get down here for submission. And this is pretty straightforward. The type is submit. Whatever you have for value is what you see on the button. And for the ID, we're calling it buttons. So let me fill this in. And that is not right. I'll just do a bogus address here. Okay, and you do not have to have real data in here. Okay, as long as you have something. Okay, so we've got all that filled in. I'm going to hit submit. And it did submit to the script, and it used get. So you can see right across the top, all my data is showing. So not confidential at all. And then you can see the name value pairs, okay, where it's what name it's pulling, and then the values that it is displaying. And you can test out reset by clicking reset. Everything should go back to the initial settings. Now to check the Flexbox properties, let me pull this off. What you want to do is you don't want to have it maximized. And you want to kind of play around with the size. Eventually you get a scroll bar because we did have a minimum width set up, but until you hit the minimum, you're not going to see it. Like I'm seeing it now. Okay, so this would accommodate different screen sizes fairly well. And definitely you need to check this in different browsers. Now I'm going to copy. We'll pull this up in a couple of them because they do handle these things different. You can see right away that that's a little different how it's displaying the list. Okay, and the rest of it is fairly similar. You will notice another difference in the dates. Okay, this little prompt telling you if a field is required is actually kind of useful too. Okay, so this is Microsoft Edge. Let me copy, go into Firefox. Okay, so you can see that that was required, and I'm getting a little prompt, and you can certainly see that the focus is on that field. Email is required, and it's giving me a very nice little prompt. Okay, I have to actually click in here. I don't see the arrow. So I have to click and kind of scroll for all of my choices. Okay, but that's how it looks in Firefox. So it is going to look different in the different browsers. So you definitely do want to check out the forms in all of them.